I showed up at my son's wedding. He blocked the church door and said, "You weren't invited, Mom." I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just said 7 words. "Okay, but check your phone later, sweetheart." My phone was still warm in my lap when the doors of St. Augustine's flew open. Aaron came through them first. One hand braced on the frame like the building itself had tilted. His tie was loose. His face had gone the color of the tablecloths inside, a white that wasn't supposed to be on a person. Stephanie was 2 steps behind him, heels catching on the stone, her bouquet already abandoned somewhere in the vestibule. I didn't move the car. I didn't roll down the window right away either. I just watched my son cross that parking lot in his rented shoes, phone in his fist, and I let myself have 3 full seconds of feeling like a mother again, instead of a woman who'd spent 8 months building a case. 3 seconds. That was all I gave myself. He reached the car and slapped his palm flat against the glass. Not violent, just desperate, like he needed something solid to hold on to that wasn't shifting under him. "Mom," his voice cracked on the single syllable. "Mom, is this real? Tell me this is fake." I rolled the window down 6 inches, not all the way. I'd learned that much in 8 months. You don't hand someone everything at once, even your own son, especially your own son. Every word of it. I said. Every date, every signature, every wire transfer, it's real, Aaron. Behind him, Stephanie had stopped 10 feet back, arms crossed over her ivory dress, and for just a second, 1 second before she caught herself, her face did something I'd never seen it do in 4 months of Sunday dinners. It went flat. Not sad, not shocked, calculating, like a woman checking how many exits were left in the room. That was the moment I knew I hadn't imagined any of it. "Mom, what does this mean?" Aaron's thumb kept sliding across the screen, opening the same photo again and again like it might change if he looked at it enough times. "The notary thing. Who is she signing as?" "Get in the car and I'll tell you everything," I said. "Not here. Not with 140 people watching through those doors." Stephanie found her footing then, the way she always did, fast and smooth. "Aaron, baby, come back inside. We can figure this out after. People are staring. We can deal with your mother's little stunt later." Little stunt. I let that sit in the air a second. "Stephanie, I have a notarized affidavit with your legal name on it. I have bank records. I have a civil filing from Montgomery County, Ohio, with a man's name on it who is not related to me in any way. Which part of that is a stunt?" She didn't answer. Her eyes went to Aaron instead, doing the math on which way this was going to break. "I want to back up. Just for a minute, because there's a piece of this Aaron never knew, and I think it matters. The part where I stopped being a grieving widow and started being someone with a case file. 3 weeks after Gerald's funeral, our lawyer, Martin Voss, sat across his mahogany desk from me and said the words that changed the shape of my grief into something with edges. "Catherine, your husband built more than you think he did, and he left instructions for how it's protected." He'd handled Gerald's estate work for 11 years by then, and I'd never once seen him look nervous reading a document to me. He looked nervous that day. I didn't tell anyone what was in that file. Not my sister, not my neighbor, not Aaron. I sat with it the way you sit with a diagnosis, quietly at 2 a.m., turning it over. Then Stephanie showed up at my dinner table in heels for a Tuesday pot roast, and something in my stomach didn't sit right. It wasn't jealousy. God knows I wanted Aaron happy. It was the way she asked, 20 minutes into meeting me, whether the property line extended past the tree fence. It was the way she never once looked at the photograph of Gerald on the wall, not even by accident. The way people's eyes catch on a face in a room without meaning to. I hired someone. His name was Frank Delgado, a licensed private investigator who'd spent 20 years doing insurance fraud work before going independent, and Martin gave me his number without asking too many questions. Frank's first report came back in 11 days. It had a name in it that wasn't Stephanie Cole. Dana Renee Kowalski, 34. A record. Not criminal, not exactly, but close enough that it had left paper. 3 years earlier, in Dayton, Ohio, she'd been engaged to a retired contractor named Harold Nguyen, 71 years old, a widower with a paid-off house and a modest but real investment portfolio. The engagement lasted 8 months. By the time Harold's daughter got a lawyer involved, $310,000 had moved out of his accounts and into accounts that led nowhere anyone could follow. There'd been a civil suit. It ended in a sealed settlement, no admission of guilt, because Harold, humiliated, heartbroken, 71, couldn't face testifying in open court about how he'd been played. She'd changed her name legally the following year, not hidden it exactly, just filed the paperwork in a county 3 hours from Dayton and let time do the rest. Frank's second report, 3 weeks after the first, was worse in a quieter way. He'd pulled the property records on an apartment Stephanie supposedly owned outright, the one she'd mentioned at that first dinner, the one that was apparently going to be sold to help with the wedding. It was rented, month to month, under a different name again, a landlord in Scranton who'd never heard of a Stephanie Cole at all. Frank flagged something else too, almost as an afterthought in his notes. A pattern of small, staged vulnerabilities. A car that supposedly needed repairs 3 separate times in 4 months, each time solved by a loan or a gift from Erin. A sister with medical bills who, as far as Frank could find in any hospital record, did not exist. None of it on its own was a smoking gun. Together, laid out on my kitchen table under the good lamp, it read like a manual. I remember calling Martin that night and saying almost apologetically that I felt insane, that I was building a case against a woman whose only real crime, as far as anyone at that Tuesday pot roast could see, was being a little cold to an old widow. Martin didn't laugh at me. He said, "Catherine, con artists don't look like con artists. That's the entire point of the job." I've thought about that sentence more times than I can count since. I read that report standing in my kitchen with the water running, and I remember my hands were so unsteady I had to set my coffee cup down twice before I actually got it into the sink. I didn't confront her. I didn't confront Erin. I did what Gerald would have done, which was nothing loud at all. I let Frank keep working. I let Martin start building the paper trail on our end. The loan Erin had taken out, $68,000, and the joint account it landed in that Stephanie had opened 4 days before their engagement was even announced. I let the recorded call sit in a file. The one where Erin coached, I now believed, told a loan officer he'd already come into significant family assets, which wasn't true. Not yet, not without my signature, and which made that loan application a document built on a lie he didn't know he was telling. 8 months of quiet. 8 months of a woman everyone thought was fading into widowhood, sitting at her kitchen table at midnight with a case file growing thicker under a false bottom in her sewing basket. And then a wedding invitation never came, and my son stood in a church doorway and told me I wasn't one of them anymore. So I sent the file, and I drove exactly 40 minutes back toward that church when Erin didn't call. He came. "Get in the car," I told him. "Both of you can stand out here explaining yourselves to 140 guests. Or you can get in the car and let me tell you what I actually found. Your choice." Erin looked back at the church. Through the open doors, I could see his best man standing in the aisle with his hands on his hips. And beyond him, guests craning out of pews. Like this was the most interesting sermon they'd sat through in years. Someone, I found out later it was his college roommate, a man named Curtis, already had his phone up, recording. That video would matter more than I understood in that moment. "We are not doing this in a car in a parking lot," Stephanie said, finding her voice, and it had gone sharp, brittle. All the warmth she'd performed for 8 months burned off in about 90 seconds. "Erin, this is exactly what I told you she'd try. She's punishing you for choosing me. This is elder manipulation. This is—" "Don't." Erin didn't raise his voice. He just said it once, and something in his tone made her stop mid-sentence. "The photo, Steph. The name on it. Is it yours? That's a doctored image. Anyone can fake a document, Erin. You know that. We talked about this exact thing happening. We talked about my mother trying to sabotage us. We didn't talk about a notary seal." His hand, the one not holding his phone, had started to shake. I watched him notice it and shove it into his pocket like he could hide it from himself. "Get in the car, Steph." She got in. I think she got in because the alternative was standing in a parking lot in a wedding dress, while 140 people watched her decide, and even then, even in that moment, she was still managing her image like it was the only asset she had left worth protecting. I drove 3 blocks to a diner on Route 9, the same one Gerald used to take Erin to after Little League games, because some habits are older than betrayal, and my hands needed something familiar to hold on to. A steering wheel on a road I'd driven 1,000 times. We took the back booth. Stephanie sat with her arms crossed the entire time, dress pooling around her like she was posing for a photograph nobody was taking. I laid the folder on the table between the ketchup and the napkin dispenser. Exhibit A was the notarized document with her legal name. Exhibit B was the Ohio civil filing. Exhibit C was a printed screenshot of the joint account statement, the one Martin had subpoenaed as part of the estate revocation process, showing the loan deposit and, 2 lines below it, a transfer out that Erin had never authorized. Exhibit D, the one I'd sent to his phone, sat on top. Erin read every page twice. I watched him get to the loan statement and go still in a way that scared me more than if he'd cried. "This says $58,000 moved out of the account in March," he said. I didn't move that." "I did," Stephanie said, flat. No apology in it. "For the venue deposit and the honeymoon. I was handling the finances so you wouldn't have to stress during wedding planning. That's what partners do, Erin. You told me the venue deposit was $12,000. It was going to work out. I had a plan." "What plan?" His voice cracked upward, and the waitress, refilling coffee 2 booths down, glanced over and then very deliberately didn't glance again. "What plan, Steph? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you took money my dead father worked 30 years for and you moved it somewhere I can't see." She didn't answer that. She reached for the folder instead, tried to slide Exhibit B toward herself like she could make it disappear by holding it, and I put my hand flat on the table, not on the paper, just there. She reached for the folder instead, tried to slide Exhibit B toward herself like she could make it disappear by holding it, and I put my hand flat on the table, not on the paper, just there. A boundary. That leaves the table when Erin's lawyer sees it. I said. Not before. You don't get to control this, Catherine. First time she'd used my name without Mom, wrapped around it in some performance of closeness. It came out like a blade. You've hated me since the day we met. This is exactly the kind of thing a woman like you does to keep her son small enough to control. I want to tell you I had some devastating line ready. I didn't. I just looked at her. This woman who'd sat at my table and eaten my pot roast and never once looked at my husband's photograph. And I said, Harold Nguyen would probably have something to say about who's controlling who. That was the first time I saw her mask slip all the way off. Not anger. Fear. A real fast flash of it, gone in a second, but I'd raised a son for 28 years, and I know what fear looks like on a face that's trying very hard not to show it. Stephanie left the diner before the check came. Aaron drove her back to the apartment they'd been sharing. His apartment, technically, though I'd noticed months ago her name had somehow gotten added to the lease. And I went home alone, still in my ironed dress, and sat at my kitchen table with the folder in front of me like it might tell me what to do next if I stared at it long enough. She showed up at my house at 9:40 that night. I know the time because I'd just turned off the porch light, and her headlights swung across the living room curtains and made me freeze with my hand still on the switch. She didn't ring the bell. She knocked, 3 sharp raps, and when I opened the door she was still half in her wedding dress, the veil gone, mascara tracked down one cheek in a way that might have made me feel sorry for her in a different life. You have no idea what you've done, she said, before I'd even gotten the storm door unlatched. Aaron loves me. Whatever you think you found, it doesn't change that. You're going to lose him either way, Catherine. The only question is whether you lose him slow, the way you were already losing him before I ever showed up, or whether you lose him fast, tonight, because he never forgives you for humiliating me in front of everyone he knows. You should leave, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. My hands, tucked behind the door where she couldn't see them, were shaking so hard I had to press them flat against my thighs. I want the folder. Whatever your investigator gave you, that's private information, obtained illegally, and I will absolutely have a lawyer look at how you got it. Frank Delgado is a licensed investigator working within the law, and everything in that folder is public record or documentation, your own fiancé's bank provided under subpoena. You're welcome to have a lawyer look at any of it. I didn't move to let her in. Good night, Stephanie, or Dana. I genuinely don't know which one you'd prefer tonight. She stood on my porch for a long moment after that, and something passed over her face that I didn't have a name for until much later, after Detective Cruz explained it to me. The particular look of someone recalculating an exit they'd never expected to need. Then she turned around, got back in her car, and drove off into the dark, and I stood in my doorway for a full minute afterward just breathing, the way you do after you've walked away from the edge of something without quite knowing how close you came. Aaron didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. By 7 the next morning, we were both in Martin Voss's office, and Martin, 61 years old, 34 years in estate and elder law, a man who kept a framed photo of his own late wife on the credenza where clients could see it, laid out exactly where we stood. The transfer revocation holds, he told us, sliding a document across the desk toward Aaron. It was executed with documented cause, coercion, and material misrepresentation, both of which we now have substantially more evidence for than we did yesterday morning. That part isn't in question. He looked at Aaron over his glasses. What's in question is whether we're dealing with a civil matter or a criminal one. Given what your mother's investigator found in Ohio, I'd say it's both. Criminal how? Aaron said. His voice had gone hoarse. Identity misrepresentation used to secure financial benefit, possibly wire fraud, depending on how those transfers moved and where they landed. I want you talking to financial crimes today. Not next week. I know a detective who's handled exactly this kind of case before. He was already writing a name on a card. Elena Cruz, 14 years with the county, the last 6 in the fraud division. Tell her I sent you. Martin slid one more document across the desk, this one thinner, a single page. This is a formal notice of estate revocation, effective as of Gerald's original instructions, citing coercion and material misrepresentation as documented cause. I need both your signatures acknowledging you've been informed of it. Aaron, I want to be clear. This isn't punitive toward you. It simply means the transfer that was in motion doesn't complete. Nothing has been taken from you that was ever legally yours to begin with. Aaron signed without reading it twice. I think by that point, he'd stopped needing to. Detective Cruz met us at 2 that afternoon in a plain interview room that smelled like burnt coffee, and she was nothing like the television version of the job. No leather jacket, no dramatic pauses. Just a woman in a gray blazer with a legal pad and a directness that made the whole thing feel, for the first time, like something with rules I could understand. Walk me through the timeline, she said. And I did, and Aaron did. And Martin sat beside us and interjected only when the legal ground got uneven. Detective Cruz took the folder, Exhibits A through D, plus everything Frank Delgado had compiled over 8 months, plus a printed transcript of the recorded loan call. And she was quiet for a long time. flipping pages. "This name," she said finally, tapping the Ohio filing. "Dana Kowalski. We've had a flag on a variant of this name for about 14 months. Interstate Financial Crimes Task Force circulated it after the Nguyen settlement. Not enough for charges then, the family wouldn't testify, but enough that if it surfaced again somewhere else, somebody was supposed to hear about it." She looked up. "You just made somebody hear about it. What happens now?" Aaron asked. His hands were flat on the table, pressing down like he needed the weight of them to stay still. "Now I need everything your mother has. Properly logged. Chain of custody matters if this goes anywhere near a courtroom. So I need original documents, not photocopies where we can help it. And I need Mr. Delgado's contact information so I can verify his methods held up to scrutiny." She paused. "And I need to know if there's still money to protect. Because in my experience, once someone like this feels the ground shift, the first thing they do is move whatever's left." She had one of her officers photograph and log every original document right there in the interview room, sealing them into evidence bags with case numbers written in block letters. Exhibit E, the Ohio civil filing; Exhibit F, the Scranton lease; Exhibit G, the recorded loan call, transcribed and timestamped. Watching a stranger turn 8 months of my kitchen table work into numbered evidence bags did something strange to me. It made it real in a different way than the notary photo had. This wasn't a mother's suspicion anymore. It was a case. "One more thing," Detective Cruz said, closing her folder. "Neither of you talked to Ms. Cole, Ms. Kowalski, without one of us present, going forward. Not to negotiate, not to get closure, not for any reason. I've seen people undo 6 months of careful work in one phone call because they wanted an apology that was never coming." She looked at Aaron specifically when she said it, not unkindly. "I know that's hard to hear." That was the sentence that put the clock on the wall. Diane Okafor was the forensic accountant Martin brought in that same evening, a CPA and certified fraud examiner who'd spent 9 years untangling exactly this kind of financial knot. Small silver reading glasses pushed up into gray-streaked hair, moving through bank statements the way I imagine a surgeon moves through an X-ray, seeing shapes the rest of us couldn't. She found it at 4:40 p.m. "There's a scheduled transfer," she said, turning her laptop toward the three of us, me, Aaron, Martin, crowded into a conference room that had gone too warm with all of us breathing the same air. $31,200, remaining balance in the joint account. It was set up 2 weeks ago as a post-wedding transfer, labeled Honeymoon Fund, destination account under the name Stephanie Cole. She looked up at Aaron. "It's scheduled to execute today, 5 p.m. And an hour ago, someone logged into the account remotely and moved the execution time up. It's set to process at 6. I looked at the clock on the wall. 4:47. "Can we stop it?" Aaron said, not really a question, more like a prayer with words attached. "Not without a court order freezing the account, and not without the bank's compliance department confirming it before the automated process runs," Martin said, already reaching for his phone. "Judge Holloway's chambers close at 5. If we can get an emergency ex parte order filed and signed in the next 40 minutes, then we've got a chance." Diane finished. "I have never in my life watched a room move that fast." Martin was on the phone with the courthouse clerk, voice clipped and urgent in a way I'd never heard from him before, using words like irreparable harm and flight risk and emergency relief. Diane was pulling every statement, every wire log, every timestamp into a single document that could go in front of a judge in minutes instead of days. Detective Cruz called back within 10 minutes to say she was requesting the bank hold the transaction on a fraud flag, buying us time even if the order came late, but only if she could cite an active investigation, and only if the paperwork existed to back that claim up right now, not tomorrow. 4:51. Martin, still on hold with Chambers, mouthed, come on," at the phone like it could hear him. 4:53. Diane's printer jammed on page 4 of 6. And I watched a grown, credentialed forensic accountant swear under her breath and yank the tray open with both hands. 4:55. My own phone buzzed. A text from a guest I barely knew. Someone's aunt, asking if the reception was still happening. I turned it face down without answering. There wasn't room in my chest for anything that wasn't the clock. Aaron sat across that table with his tie completely undone now, staring at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. "Mom," he said, quiet, under the noise of Martin's phone call. "If I sign a sworn statement about the loan, about what I told that loan officer, I could be in trouble too. I lied on a federal application, even if she talked me into it." I felt my stomach drop. I lied on a federal application, even if she talked me into it. I felt my stomach drop the way it does when a car goes over a hill too fast. This was the part I hadn't fully prepared for. Not the villain, my son. "I can't tell you it's risk-free," I said. "I won't lie to you about that. But Martin says a sworn statement showing coercion, given voluntarily and immediately, is about as protected as you can be. And Aaron, that money is gone in 13 minutes if you don't." He didn't answer for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds that felt longer than 8 months. Then he picked up the pen Martin had left on the table and started writing. The order came through at 4:58 p.m. Judge Holloway signed it from her kitchen kitchen table, Martin told us later, because her chambers assistant caught her by phone on the way out to her car. Diane forwarded it to the bank's fraud line at 4:59. Detective Cruz confirmed the freeze at 5:04. $22,000 had already cleared before the hold caught. $9,200 was stopped in place, frozen, recoverable. A fraction, but not nothing, and more importantly, a paper trail with a judge's signature on it, which Detective Cruz said mattered more than the dollar amount. Fraud cases aren't won by getting all the money back, she told us the next morning, in that same plain interview room. They're won by proving intent. You just proved intent. We sat in her office past 7 that night, all three of us wrung out, watching the confirmation email load on Diane's laptop like it might disappear if we blinked. When it finally came through, transaction held pending investigation. Nobody cheered. Aaron just put his face in his hands and stayed like that for a long time, and I reached over and put my hand on his back the way I used to when he was 7 and couldn't fall asleep after a nightmare, and neither of us said anything, because there wasn't anything left to say that the last 6 hours hadn't already said for us. Stephanie, Dana, was picked up 2 days later, not fleeing exactly but close to it. A one-way ticket out of the regional airport, a suitcase packed heavier than a woman planning a short trip, and a story for the gate agent about a family emergency that fell apart under about 4 minutes of questioning from 2 officers who'd been waiting near the gate on Detective Cruz's instruction. The charges took 3 weeks to finalize because these things move slower than television makes you believe. Identity fraud, financial exploitation, a wire fraud charge tied to the loan misrepresentation, though, and this mattered enormously to Aaron, more than he ever said out loud. The DA's office made clear early on that his sworn statement, given voluntarily before any charges existed, put him firmly on the side of the case as a cooperating witness, not a defendant. Martin had been right. It cost Aaron something to sign that statement. It also, I think, saved something in him that mattered more than legal protection. The part of him that needed to prove, to himself as much as anyone, that he'd choose the truth once he finally saw it clearly. Curtis's phone video from the church steps ended up online within a day, the way things do now, and by the end of that week, a local reporter named Priya Sood, who covered courts and consumer fraud for the regional paper, had connected the dots to the Ohio case and put a name and a face to a pattern that had been quietly moving through at least 2 states for 3 years. Her article ran with the headline, "Bride Unmasked at the Altar," and it wasn't the first time. Harold Nguyen's daughter called Priya after reading it. Then she called Detective Cruz, a second victim from a different county entirely, called after that, a widower named Robert Ash, who'd lost his condo deposit 2 years earlier to a woman he only ever knew as Nicole. Detective Cruz told us months later that the Nguyen family finally agreed to testify. They said watching my son stand up in that video, pale, shaking, but standing there anyway, was what convinced Harold's daughter that maybe, this time, someone would be believed. The venue that had hosted the wedding kept the deposit, obviously. Nobody was fighting them about it. The florist, a kind woman named Deborah, who'd delivered white peonies to a church that never used them, called me personally to say she'd never forget that day, and not for the reason she'd expected to remember it. Dana's employer, she'd been working the front desk at a mid-sized dental practice under yet another slightly altered name, Priya's article uncovered, let her go within 48 hours of the story running, quietly, no statement, just an empty desk the following Monday. Her lease in Scranton wasn't renewed. The apartment she and Aaron had shared, the one with her name improperly added, went back to just his, and he told me later that packing up her side of the closet was somehow harder than the church steps had been, not because he missed her, but because it forced him to look, item by item, at how much of his life he'd handed to a stranger without ever really checking her name. Aaron didn't speak much for a while. There was a stretch, 6, maybe 7 weeks, where our calls were short and strange, both of us circling around what had almost happened to him, to us, without quite landing on it. He started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Lena Whitfield who specialized in financial coercion and family estrangement, and about 2 months in, he asked if I'd come to a session with him. I did. I sat in a small office with soft chairs and a box of tissues that felt almost insulting in its predictability, and I listened to my son say out loud to a stranger that the hardest part wasn't losing Stephanie. It was realizing how easily he'd let her convince him his own mother was the threat. I blocked the door, he said, and his voice broke on it in a way it hadn't even at the diner. I stood in front of you and told you that you weren't family anymore, and you still saved me. I didn't have a clean answer for that. I still don't. Not really. I just told him what was true, that I hadn't done it to be right. I'd done it because Gerald asked me to protect what he built, and somewhere in 8 months of quiet paperwork, protecting it had become the same thing as protecting Aaron, whether he wanted it or not. It's been 14 months now. Aaron married again this past spring. A woman named Julia, an elementary school teacher he met through a friend of Dr. Whitfield's, oddly enough, at a fundraiser for financial literacy education that Detective Cruz's department co-sponsored. After the case made local news, small ceremony, 40 people, not 140. No string quartet, just Julia's brother playing guitar badly and everyone laughing about it. I stood at the back of that church too this time. But Aaron met me at the door before the music started, took my arm, and walked me down the aisle himself, past guests who all knew exactly who I was and why it mattered that I was there. Dana Kowalski pled guilty to reduced charges 11 months ago, rather than face trial with 2 additional victims prepared to testify. She's serving 18 months, with restitution ordered for all 3 cases, though Martin tells me collecting on that restitution will likely take years, if it ever fully happens at all. Sometimes justice looks like a courtroom victory. Sometimes it just looks like a woman finally being seen clearly by the people who mattered before she could do it again. Harold Nguyen's daughter sent me a card after the plea hearing. Just a few lines. Nothing dramatic. Thank you for making it safe enough for my father to finally say what happened to him out loud. I keep it in the same sewing basket where the case file used to live, which feels right somehow, like the space made for one kind of secret found a better use for itself. I still drive past St. Augustine's sometimes on the way to the grocery store, and for a while the sight of those stone steps made my chest go tight. It doesn't anymore. Now I mostly think about Diane's jammed printer, and Martin mouthing, "Come on," at a silent phone, and Detective Cruz's plain gray blazer, and how an entire small army of strangers with credentials and legal pads and forensic software showed up on the worst afternoon of my son's life and simply refused to let it stay the worst afternoon of mine. I think about that church doorway sometimes, the one where my son told me I wasn't invited. I think about how close I came to simply believing him, to driving home and letting 8 months of quiet work stay folded in a sewing basket forever, because it hurt too much to use it. But Gerald didn't leave me that file to keep it safe from strangers. He left it to keep it safe from anyone who'd forgotten what it actually meant to be family, including, for one terrible afternoon, our own son. He remembers now. That's enough. That was always going to be enough.